All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you all very much for coming, and welcome to the St. Joseph NEA Board of Education Candidate Forum. We are happy to see those of you that were able to come today, because it is because of you, because of the taxpayers and the voters in this room and who are watching online now and later, that we have the ability to reshape the future of our St. Joseph School District. So I thank you. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the organization of St. Joseph NEA, we are an advocate for students, teachers, paraprofessionals, custodians, nutrition service employees, secretaries, counselors, the list goes on. We are a local affiliate of the largest professional educator association in the United States, with over 3 million members nationwide. And it is our goal to provide the promise of a quality public education for every student. That promise starts today. That promise starts with an effective Board of Education. I would like to introduce to you today our moderators for this candidate forum. We are pleased to have two respected professionals in the journalism field with us today as our moderators. Ken Newton is a journalist with the St. Joseph News Press. This is his second time moderating for the St. Joseph NEA Candidate Forum. He did this back in 2016 at the last one. And Bob Berglund is the journalism professor at Missouri Western State University. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you. Before we begin, I will go over the process of this candidate forum. The forum is broken up into 4 segments. Each segment will be 20 minutes in duration. Candidates will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. Follow-up questions will be asked when necessary. Some questions will be asked of all candidates, and others will be directed specifically to individuals, based on comments and responses in other forums and on the SJNEA candidate questionnaire. A timekeeper will use cue cards to signal to the candidates when their time has elapsed. At the conclusion of the 4th segment, the candidates will each receive 2 minutes to conclude their thoughts and comments regarding today's forum. For the audience, there are no breaks built into this forum, so if you need to leave for any reason, you are welcome to just quietly dismiss yourself through the front door here and or the side door over there, as to not interrupt the video feed here in the front of the room. With that being said, Mr. Moderators, the floor is yours.
Well, good. We'd like to start, first of all, by introducing our candidates. In the front row here, Lori Hollis, Aaron Duncan, Larry Koch, Lou Datia. In the penthouse up there, we've got David Jordan and Kenneth Reeder. I'd say in the beginning, first of all, I've covered elections for 38 years now. I think it's commendable of all of you. It is tough to put your name on a ballot. Here in St. Joseph at this point in time, in this school board environment, it is especially tough. So thank you all for doing what you're doing. We're going to go right ahead and start with our questions. And this is a question directed to all of you. I will say too that we want to hear what you have to say within our discretion of making the trains run on time. And we're gonna follow the rules that we've all agreed to, but we do want specifics, and there may be some follow-up questions that Bob and I would like to ask you. As first question, many candidates have mentioned a plan that needs to be developed to move our district forward. What are specific action steps that must be a part of this plan, and why? And we're going to begin in the front row with Laura.
It's already on. Okay. I can't tell if it's on or not.
No, the green light's on.
Glad we weren't talking like that.
Oh, we're making sounds. They're working.
Okay, now it's off. It has to be off.
No.
Good.
Woohoo! Oh, hello. Hello. Sorry, I'm trying not to blow it. No, I'm not gonna go that far.
Nope. Maybe batteries.
Where'd you go?
That one, so this one's on, just take that one off.
Yeah.
And we can hand that one around if necessary. Time's up.
Time's up. There you go, Lloyd.
You guys still have to answer this? Okay, this is.
Well, goodness gracious, maybe it's you, I don't know. There we go.
It's on. You know, I think, as far as I probably honestly haven't thought, I'm just the type that when everybody gets together, when you get your heads together, that's when you kind of come up with a plan. Of course, I know ideas that I would like to see done. I just don't know if it's really feasible. I have wondered as far as getting the school board, the way Facebook is so popular, or Twitter or whatever, open an account for the school board so that people could respond and we could actually read those from the public. I absolutely believe we need to listen to the community. We need to hear what they have to say. I think that once we start hearing their different ideas, that would help us as far as making a plan. I don't know, like I said, I'm not very internet literate and into all that stuff, but it just seems like that's the way to go as far as social media, find out what the community has to say and start making our plans from there.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan?
As far as a plan that I would have is the same one that I've kind of spoken on before, is research, show, and tell. With the new superintendent, we need to research all the current costs. It doesn't have to be down to the individual level, but by groups, you know, how much is our staffing, how many teachers do we have, how much does it cost, how many secretaries, how much is the cost, and do that through every employee of the district and every building within the district. And then get together and look at it and go, okay, where do we want to be 10, 20 years down the road? How many teachers do we need for the number of students in the classroom? How many buildings should we really have in this district? Because we do have too many at this point. At that point, once we have some different options, you take that out into the community to groups like this or PTA groups, to go out to every school building, and you show everybody, here's if we do nothing, here's what the cost will be in 10 years. If we go the grand plan, here's what the cost is going to be, and then listen to the feedback and determine what the community will allow and will support, and then you start going forward from there as far as number of teachers, levy, bond issues, number of buildings, that kind of thing in the school district. So it's just basic research, show and tell.
You're next.
Okay, thank you.
There's two microphones here. Oh. The school district already has several plans in place. They have a building plan that was put together and updated in 2016, and they have some background information on statistics in terms of how many students are located in different parts of the city. But beyond that, we need a strategic plan that looks further down the road to determine where do we want our school system to be in 10, 15 years from now, and what will be driving the change. I think we all realize, looking at history, technology really drives the changes that we have in our entire society, so we need to be taking a look at that. The way teachers teach today has to be different than it was 5 and 10 years ago. 10 years ago, not every student in the classroom had a smartphone with them, which is, I would have to think, changed the role that teachers have. So we have to have a strategic plan to back up our building plan that we kind of have in place now, but it needs to be looked at again. Beyond that, we have to have a financial plan. It's really nice to have all these great strategic plans and building plans, but unless we have a financial plan to back those up, we don't get any place. So that would be my goal, to get a strategic plan back to the financial plan to support the building plan that we have in place. We don't want to waste what's there now. We want to take advantage of it, but we want to move it forward. And frankly, there's some items in the building plan that I question because things have changed since that was put together, so we need to review it.
Okay. You know, I think before we
we get into the logistics of the plans that exist, and there are several that exist right now, we won't really be able to move forward as a district until we regain the trust of the staff and the faculty first. Doesn't matter what plan we build, how hard we work on it, if we can't get our own team on board, then the community's not going to support anything. It's really the most important. Once that's in place, then I think as a group, collectively, we look at the existing plans. Some of them need to be updated. There's several feasibility studies that were done in various areas. I know there was one done on staff and compensation. There's, like Larry said, there's been a lot of activity, but none of that matters unless we can get faculty and staff back on board, get their trust, do what's necessary, and then we can move forward with the plans. So I think doing that will help our plans come into focus.
I agree with much of what has already been said. One of the 3 or 4 things that the board needs to be aware of in the planning process is, of course, we've already heard the facility plan. And to meet the needs and the things that I'm going to mention here, we certainly have to have a budget within which we can work. And everything has been reduced as the board and the superintendent would tell you now, to the bare bones. Is that beyond the facility plan, we also need to not necessarily totally the board's responsibility, but we also have to start meeting these achievement gaps that we have in our classrooms. And to be able to do that, you have to have the resources in which to narrow the achievement gaps as well. Another need that we need to meet, we have increasingly low income student populations in our school district. We also have to plan for that because there are a lot of things that we need to do with these students that go way beyond what we're teaching from the front of the classroom. Another area that is also increasing at all times, requires a lot of funding for the district, and there's a lot of funding out there and available, and that's with our SPED students. So there's a number of things that we can continue to look at in the district, but to be able to meet all of these needs, we have to have the budget with which to do it.
Hello and good morning. Thank you very much. Great turnout for a Saturday. I have a basic plan. It's had 2 premises, and that is, I want to be on the board. I want to be your advocate for 2 people, 2 things. The taxpayer first. I think I've proven myself over the last few years for being very watchful of our tax dollars. And the second thing is for the teachers. My plan is to build trust first. We have such a broken board and broken mentality. We need to build the trust first. And how does that happen? It's 2 basic things right now. It's all about the money. We build trust by being really forthright in exactly what we're going to do with the money. You do that with a strong board. The board, we spend the money, we should be the one asking for the money. So remember, if you're watching out for the taxpayers, and in this plan to build this trust, we get our teachers from the bottom third in the state, an embarrassing amount, to the top third. You don't do that by wiggling your nose and getting it done overnight. But over 2 to 6 years, teachers in the top third instead of the bottom third, problem solved.
Thank you. We'll start a second round of questions now. We're going to begin with Mr. Duncan and go around the horn that way. To begin to rebuild public trust, first of all, when you're elected, you're going to be one of 7 people on this board. My question is, have you read and familiarized yourself with the St. Joseph School District Board policies? And can you cite examples in those policies that you would like to see amended that as part of the working relationship with the board and through that with the community?
That's a tough question for me because no, I am not 100% familiar with the board policies. As far though as doing that, obviously once elected, that would be something I would delve into and dive into and learn, just to determine how things work, why they work that way. It's part of what I do in my daily job is determine how things work, why they work that way, and what can be changed, what needs to be done better, what needs to be eliminated. We have one thing at our job is, what is the one thing or two things that you do on a daily basis that we don't need to be doing? And so I think we need to review that and make sure that, one, we're doing the right things for the right reasons. Things that we're doing that we shouldn't be doing need to be stopped. There's no point in wasting time on something you shouldn't be doing. So that would be my attack, because like I said, unfortunately I just don't know enough about the policies at this point to make a better answer. But just being honest, that's what I would dive into and look at and make a determination from there is, what can we do better? What do we need to stop doing? And who do we need to work with?
As a new member on the board in April, last April, they asked me to be on the policy committee. I thought that sounded like a good idea. What I didn't understand was how many hours we're going to be putting in on that thing. We're going through the policies one by one, looking for ways to improve them. Now, the biggest frustration that I'm having with the policies right now is that there is no good search engine to figure out what's there. It's nice to have the policies, but if you can't find out what's there, they're worthless. And just, a matter of fact, just last week we had a long conversation with the people that are working on this, and we demanded that we have an adequate search engine that people can actually go in and do a word search on those policies so that they can find the things they need to find. The policies I'm finding are good, they're well written, they have good intentions, but unless the staff can find them, unless the public can find them, they're no good to anybody. And I'm learning that a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot of people, there are cases where the policies are not being followed merely because you cannot find the right policy, you cannot determine what policy you should be using, and they're just too confusing. So that's one of the things that we hope to keep moving forward with. Well, I know we are going to move forward with it because we have to. And we will demand a good search engine, and hopefully very soon.
I have reviewed some of the policies, and from what I understand, the issue isn't the policies themselves. It's the fact that policies were not followed on a regular basis. And like Larry said, there's been a comprehensive review on board policies, administrator policies, and so I'm confident that the board is doing what's necessary, and if I'm elected to the board, it'll be part of our duty as well to review those. But I think the fundamental issue here is following the policy, and maybe that's an issue of people not knowing the policy, as Larry mentioned, but the public's issue is just that if there is a policy, is it being followed? If it is being followed, is it wrong? And I think we have to start with, is it being followed correctly before we start making edits to the policy.
Well, I agree. If you've been attending any of the board meetings recently, the last few months, there have been many board policy reviews, and a number of those I've seen is like, oh, and I worked for the district for almost 20 years and didn't even know that it existed. But again, access to it is all very important. Some of the things that are tied with this, of course, anything on the board policy affects administration employees directly, is that in the last couple of years that we have had put in place many of the checks and balances systems that are protecting the funding, watching the budgets, and how things can and should be done. Also on reporting, on the line and staff reporting on how that is processed. For about 3 years ago, we kind of got away from that, and I know this last year or so that the superintendent and the administration teams have been working to get this back in line. But tied to that, because it's been referred to me as that, well, does that mean that the community people and employees cannot talk directly to the board members? And that's absolutely not true. Anyone at any time can talk to a board member, or at least if I'm a board member, you certainly can. This does not mean that we can automatically or immediately fix your problem, but we can probably direct you to the person that could, or also get you into that line and staff process so that the right people can help you and so that it can be resolved. Ultimately, you can always appeal to the board, and that's what we're here for.
Just a short glance at the policies that make you want to, if you need good sleeping material, to dig into those. And in that situation, you know, less is more. In this situation particularly, in a big taxing public entity like this, all this thick group of policies, which over the years I've tried to even halfway stay awake and pay attention to why, it's mostly in place to protect the bureaucrats and the politicians within the system. You know who it's against? It doesn't help you and me, the common person in the district, the common person out here. So less is more. Basically, you could probably throw the entire thing out and go back with some type of template. Because policy is policy, right is wrong, wrong is right. What you got to do in this, when you have a thick bunch of policies, whether they be thick or refined, you have to have someone willing to stand up against a policy when it's wrong, when it's not good for the person we're here for, the taxpayer and the teacher, and that equals the student. Policies are only good if somebody's willing to stand against them if they're wrong. So less is more, and for us to try to discuss policy at this, thank you very much, but we don't want to go to sleep here on a Saturday afternoon.
What Ken said is partially right. I think one of the reasons that those policies have become so huge and so much detail to them is because through the years issues have come up, and there's no you can't set just one pattern for every situation. So sometimes situations come up that have to be dealt with, so that's why those things were put in those policies to begin with. Now, listening to David, I haven't read the school district policies for years ago. I did when I worked for the district for 23 years when I was down in personnel. Part of those things I had to type up. So at one point, I know one of the things I kind of had an issue with was when, I don't know, probably 8 or 10 years ago, we were told at one of our meetings right before school started at our individual schools that employees could no longer communicate with the school board members. That really kind of, I don't know, tweaked my nose a little bit. I don't know how to say it. So if that has been changed, I'm really glad. If if it has not, it definitely needs to be changed. We need to be available and accessible for all employees, because you guys are the ones, the employees are the ones doing the work. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next segment. So this is the audience question segment. Just want to echo Ken's comments too, as far as just my hats go out to all of you. This is not a position, of course, that pays highly. You get a lot of flack from the community, as the board members have found out over the years, but it's reassuring that we have so many people who are choosing to run, and because this really is a position of service. And so I thank you in advance for volunteering to be under that firing squad. So my question, I'm going to start out with the elephant in the room, and that is the levy. So one of the questions from the audience referred to the levy, and why do you think that the levy failed by the margin that it did, and what would be your pathway, either in terms of communication strategies or numbers, in terms of what would be asked for in the levy to get it passed the second time? And we'll go ahead and, again, going around the horn, that seems like a fair way to do it. Go ahead and start us off, Larry.
Well, I can't list all the reasons that have failed, because I've heard so many of them. Some key reasons why it was too much, not a good plan to follow. It did not have a sunset clause. Those probably the top three. More importantly is how are we going to move forward. We're in a situation right now where we have a budget set for next school year, which starts next fall. It'll be the 18-19 school year. We have a budget in place for that. We have some significant cuts in that budget that will be permanent, such as closing 2 schools as a permanent cut, changing block scheduling to 7-hour days, that's a permanent cut. So we have about $4 million worth of permanent cuts. The other $4 million are kind of a temporary measure that we will not be able to sustain for the 19-20 school year. So we have to do something to make up that $4 million loss. We need to have a lot of talk among the board members, but Right now, my idea is to kind of have a temporary, maybe a 3 or 4 year levy of $4 to $5 million that will carry us over while we can put together a more permanent plan. I mentioned before the need for a financial plan and a strategic plan, but we have to do something to sustain us over for a 3 or 4 year period. And something in the area, well, you know, we lost a 63 cent levy, that's about $9 million. So something in the area of a 45, 50 cent levy that would carry us over for a 3 to 4 year period with a sunset clause on it, give us some breathing room, some time to put a good plan together. That seems like an approach that might work.
I'm going to go back to an earlier comment that I made. It was trust. I think our own staff and teachers were not behind it, and that's one of the main reasons it failed. You know, they are ambassadors for the school, the district, and if they're not on board with the plan, if they don't trust the board or administration, nothing we do. It was a very top-down approach is why it failed. And I know it's bad timing, and there's, as Larry mentioned, there's a host of reasons we've all heard of why it failed. I think that's the key one. Number one, there's some, you know, specifics in there, perhaps the amount, perhaps the sunset, but it all starts with trust, and it starts with the teachers and staff. And then when the teachers and staff trust who they work for, and they go out into the community, you know, early in my years of being involved with this, I would talk to my teacher friends when I had a question, and everybody does that. So it starts there. I think it starts with taking care of our own, and then from there, if we're going to do this again, we have to make sure we're all on the same page before we go to the public asking for money.
Well, I think Larry and Lute have stated the main reasons why the levy failed this past time. And I personally don't believe it would matter what the levy had stated at that time, that it probably would have failed, because this was the only route that the community had, other than, and it's your call, or editorials or something like that. It's the only way that they could express their personal opinions right back to the district. And it certainly got the district's attention, I can assure you of that. But we do need to get a levy put back into place. Whatever's put back in place, whatever the amount might be, certainly needs to have a sunset clause. Whether you believe it should or should not philosophically, the community has stated we need a sunset clause with it. We do need to get more operational money, because what we have right now is just a temporary fix. There'll be bills that will be coming up, programs that need to be reinstated, new resources that need to be purchased. Right now we have a freeze on purchasing any textbooks. Think about that. How long do textbooks last? So we have a lot of things that in the next couple of years that will need funding, and folks, funding is not there right now.
From start to beginning to end, even the attempt for the levy, the bond, the amount, no sunset, and one of the primary reasons anywhere else, when the board is the people who spend the money, that's the people who normally 99% of the time, the rest of the world, they go out and ask for the money. You know, our board was totally void, couldn't be out in front. It was so broken. So they went out and recruited a lot of good folks and spent a lot of money, and still came up with 27%. And I dare say that this is a tough crowd to get people to be willing to admit that you were in that 74%, or you're the ones that are fearful of having a no sign in your yard. So the whole idea of asking was a kind of a belligerent sharp stick in the face of everybody, and that carried over into the despicable practice of this outgoing damaged board picking a new superintendent 35 days before 3 new voices have a chance to weigh in on that. Tell me, how is that right? It's tone deaf. It's muteness. The board has to be accountable. They're spending the money. They have to be in front asking for the money from the people. That takes care of the taxpayer. The next thing, when our teachers are the top third of the state, problem solved.
Well, for me, the number one reason is because the people were still saying they don't listen. Nothing's changed. They're not listening to us. They're not listening to what we want. The news press had a question in there with the public saying, would you pass this tax before it come about? And every single day it was in there, the people said no, they would not pass this tax. But they went ahead and did it anyway. So the people are just like, they're still not listening. It's the same old stuff. They're still going to do what they want with our money. We are not going to entrust these people with our money when they're just going to do the same thing they've always done. It's like the community has just been yelling and screaming, and they haven't listened. They've done what they wanted to do. Also, I do think we're going to have the sunset clause on there. Whether you agree with it or not, this community is not going to pass a tax without a sunset clause. That's just the way it is. If you want to pass a tax, you got to put it on there. I also think that they were kind of overstretching. They asked for too much, and the people were like, what are they doing here? We're going from 63 cents to over $1, you know. So we are going to have to pass a tax. It's got to be done. But we're going to have to put that sunset clause back on there. We're going to have to listen to what the public is saying, and we're going to have to lower what we're asking for.
I think the reasons why has been pretty well covered. There were a lot of them. As far though as, like Larry said, moving forward, and everybody has said, we do need operating levy expenses because we can't operate a school district our size with what we're getting at this point. So it goes back to my prior answer with the research show and tell. We need to dig in and we need to research what we have, where the money is going, and go out to everybody again and show them that. Here's where we're at, here's where we could be. And based on that feedback, listening to the consumer, the parents, the taxpayers, the voters, as to what they can handle in some cases or what they would support, that's how then you set that, whether it's the 52 cents, it's 63 cents, it's 88 cents, whatever that magic number is, because we need to provide our teachers and students with the tools that they need to be able to teach, whether that's appropriate teacher-to-student ratios, whether that's pencils and paper in the classroom. We've got to present that to our community, and I think it needs to be something over a 10-year period, even with the sunset clause, so that way we can also start working on the buildings and making sure we're reducing our operating expenses that way, so that way the operating levy has more to go around for where it needs to go, the teachers and the students.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a quick follow-up to that, since we got some specifics out of some people, but some not. So, number one, when, and we'll make it 30 seconds, just when do you think that this next levy should take place? Do you have a ballpark, how many cent levy, and sunset clause, yes or no? So if you can go around and, yep. So Larry can start us off again, since that was just a follow-up.
It was when?
So when do we make the next ask? Ballpark figure on the percent levy, and yes or no on the sunset clause.
November 2018 for the election, somewhere between 40 and 50 cents on the levy. I have to look at the total budget, figure that out. What was the third part of it?
The sunset clause, yes or no?
Yes, have to have it. It's bad business practice, but it's necessary in St. Joe.
Okay.
I'd say the when depends on when we can get consensus that we all agree. And there's a great group that's been put together that's working on that. The how much is going to be dictated by the budget. I think Larry's kind of nailed it with the 40 to 50 cents. And the sunset clause, we've heard from the public, it needs to be put in there, so we need to respond and put it in there.
I believe we definitely need to have this done within the next year, and there'll be require a lot of planning and community involvement to begin that process. And at the same range as the other two gentlemen have spoken about, it'd probably definitely be less than the 63 cents that we just lost. And for sure, it must have a sunset clause to be able to pass. I think for it to be able to pass, it also, what will have to be promoted with the community is that there will have to be a plan, a listing of what the money is going to be used for prior to that election.
I'm okay with next April when we're electing 2 new board members. We're putting it on the election then and make it a campaign issue as well. Kill 2 or 3 birds with 1 stone. And I'm willing to go back with what we lost, 63 cents a few years ago, when they should have started cutting the budget, not here 2 years later. So I'd be okay with sunset, not more than 5 years or 7 at the most. And the idea that it's bad for business is totally wrong. Look at our library board. It operates on a sunset clause. It just came up, but they were smart enough to run it a few years before it came due. It's the same thing we could do here. Sunset is the best thing for this community long term, keeps everybody accountable, and you have a chance to run it before it actually comes due. And smart communities do that, not one to wait until they make it desperation, make us all drink the Kool-Aid and jump off the tall buildings.
I feel like as far as when, they ought to give we're going to be almost half new board. I think they ought to let us dig our heels in and sit in and see what we can do. So I think we should have a school year to do that. Absolutely have to have a sunset clause on there. Let us see what we can do and what we come up with, and if there's cuts that we can find, and then we'd have to decide on the amount then.
I don't know if we can get the research done and get out to the public with the new board and the new superintendent prior to when you have to actually have a levy in place for the November election. So it may have to be in April, which would give us more time as a new board and everything. How much? Kind of depends on what the public is going to support, but we probably at least need to go 52 to 63 cent range at a minimum. And then it does have to be specific, and I agree with Larry, it's bad business for a school district, but a sunset clause would have to be on there about 10 years.
Okay, so we'll move on to, we'll have time for one more in this segment. We had numerous people submit lots of questions, so thank you audience members for submitting questions, as well as the questions online. A bunch of them, ones that are asked today, it's rather fitting of course. Today is the March for Our Lives, and so we had several questions about safety in the schools, and so any comments or suggestions you have for making students and teachers feel safe in the classroom?
That's a great question. It's certainly a subject on everybody's minds. And safety and what's been happening with the school shootings is another good example of why we should reassess our facilities. I know it's just making the assumption that the logistics of securing every building the way we want it secured is going to be difficult. When we design future buildings, we have to start thinking about this, unfortunately, of how to design these buildings with security in mind. Number one. Number two, this is a new cost of doing business as a school. It's not something we anticipated or anybody anticipated. It's pretty dramatic. If you look at the emergency room scenario, there's usually an armed officer or guard there. There's usually 1, maybe 2 entrances in and out because that's how they were built, and we have to start thinking that way, unfortunately. And that is a fine reason, I think, to look at our facilities and to raise money. If we're going to do so, it needs to be about the safety of the staff, the teachers, and the students.
This is something that's very important, and I think it was the last board meeting or the last work session, Dr. Haynes gave a security report to the board and where we stand in our schools. I believe our schools are about as safe as they can be. It's something, as a classroom teacher, I was actually the first few years that I taught, things like Columbine and 9/11, these had not taken place, and it was a whole different world. The doors, I taught at Central High School, and it's a big old building, the doors are always wide open, especially when it was warm, and that's not the world that we live in today. So it's something I think most of the staff is very concerned about, and we watch about everything that, at least what I know right now, could be done to keep the building safe is there. But the doors have to be kept locked, and when you've got 1,700 students in a building, and the Central High School has 27 entrances, I believe, and keeping all those safe and secure, just that one example, is quite a challenge. But as we keep researching and investing in security through the district, it's very important. Right now, I don't know where that funding would come from if we needed to change things. But we constantly need to replace our security cameras, add more security cameras. Hopefully, I would like to see more resource officers in our schools today. Oh. Sorry. Not shut me down.
It's kind of a hot potato because you can really reveal yourself about how you feel about a lot of issues on this subject. I think that this is above our pay grade and a discussion obviously everybody's having, and one we should be in the forefront of. We should be in the top percentage of doing whatever we can do. There's a gentleman or two in the room, as a matter of fact, who knows a lot about security on these type of facilities. It can be done. Guess what? It costs money. But I think we should be in front of the talk on that and continue. But as far as the importance for this town and this community of moving the school district forward, we need to still concentrate on local us, building the trust back with our local taxpayer and our local people. So yes, I'll just be in front of everything to do whatever we can do the most, not say we didn't do it. And at that point, you can't really argue that money's an object. So again, we need to concentrate on the local stuff as far as putting our heart and soul into this. This is mostly an opinion. We don't have the capacity to tell you this in a minute.
Now it's my turn. Well, I'm working at Central High School for 16 years, and I can tell you, I'm not saying that having all the doors locked is a bad thing. I'm not saying that, but you can't expect the secretaries who have children in their office and they're just so busy, and there's no way they can screen people. I mean, and if somebody had a gun under their coat, the secretary couldn't see that with that little bitty mirror. So I don't think that's really the answer. And it's something that has to be discussed, and maybe my idea isn't even feasible, but I have wondered, we have thousands and thousands of military men out there that are guarding in other countries and stuff, and I've thought, you know, why can't that be like their active duty is to take turns, you know, just being in our schools, guarding our schools. And I'm not talking with all the, you know, machine guns and all that kind of stuff, but just military men that are used to using guns. I certainly do not think the answer is telling our teachers that they have to have guns. I can't even imagine teachers are there because they love kids. Could they shoot a kid? I mean, that's just not a reasonable request to me.
Dropping my son off at Central because he has a free first hour. You know, I've seen kids just open the door to let somebody in. And there's, like David said, there's 27, I don't even know if 27 is the right number of doors at Central. You can walk around that building and get in without anybody seeing you. So it is going to be an expense. And that does have to be very well detailed out in whatever we ask for a levy, because we don't have the money to do anything right now. You know, somebody said in the paper, well, put metal detectors at all the doors. Well, 27 doors, 27 metal detectors, 27 staff members having to man those is not feasible. You know, so we do need to look at that. And we do need to make sure it is student resource officers, people that are trained in crisis management and handling guns. Because as Lori said, arming our teachers is not an answer. Teachers don't want to do that. My mom, as a teacher, she couldn't have even carried a gun. She wouldn't have even wanted to carry a gun because she was a special ed teacher and a K-4 teacher. There's no way she could have pulled a gun on somebody. Not a chance of that, so that's not something we want to do. But we do need to research it and figure out with all of our buildings how we can secure them with proper personnel. But that does, again, it does cost money.
Our two new buildings, Oak Grove and Carden Park, are better suited for security. That was considered when those were designed and built. Our older buildings, it's not the case. Like as mentioned, 20, what'd you say, 27
They told me 27. I was the last door, I was number 27.
Okay. To say nothing of the windows that we used to jump in and out of during class.
That happens too.
But, so our older buildings are not very secure. Resource officers are very important in our schools. Right now, we can afford to fund 6. Right now we have 23 school buildings. We will have 21 next year. We closed Lake and Humboldt. We still have 21 buildings, and we have 6 resource officers. I think we have to find a way to fund those. The city provides 50% of the funding. Thank them for that. And we provide the other 50% of the funding. So that's the area where we'll have to concentrate. I do believe there are some weaknesses. I'm not going to go into them because I think it's improper to make public known what the weaknesses are that we're working on right now to strengthen.
Very good, thank you. And we'll start with Mr. Jordan on this round of questions. There are groups that collectively bargain with the school district. What's your position on unions in a public school district, and in what ways will you work to negotiate in good faith with unions?
I believe if a group of employees vote to be represented by a union, that they should, or I mean, all employees of the district have that right, which they can vote. But if they do vote to form a union, and again, it would not be all 2,000 employees. It would be, there are different segments, different groups in which to do that. Currently, we have 2 groups in the St. Joseph School District that have had that vote, and that right now are working working on the contracts with the school district. I have absolutely no problem with it, because if this is what the employees have expressed that they would like to do, I think it's the school district's, the school district should be bargaining with them in good faith.
It's my understanding that the MSTAs are negotiating people at this point, right? Not the NEA with our school district, don't they represent?
SJSD United. It's a combination.
Okay, it is NEA then?
No.
Okay. So if NEA is not representing this district in any capacity, there's no union representing this district. Because the only union that is here available is the the NEA, excuse me. The MSTA is who we use for a negotiation, but they are not a union. And I always kind of wondered maybe if they had proper representation, maybe we wouldn't be in that bottom third of pay scale. Here's the statistic. In the nation, I think there's about 5,000 school districts. 2/3 of those districts are the teachers are represented by the union, a real union like the NEA. In the rest of the country, 5,000 districts, about 50% of the staff, janitors and kitchen, are represented by the union. In St. Joe, 0 and 0. I've had this argument with Ray Allen and Mike Veal for years about how can you represent them so highly all the time, and they're the most anti-union school district in the state. So, and especially they're always leading Democratic on top of it. So, I'd say union representation may be one of the factors why why we're in the bottom third.
I agree with David as far as I think that if it's for our employees and to represent them and give them a voice, I definitely think that we should support any kind of union as long as it's as long as they're doing what's best for the employees. I think that we should definitely listen to them. I believe that the employees, there's just no way possible. The district has a lot of employees. There's no way possible to meet and talk to and speak with every single one of them and hear what their concerns are. So if they join one of these unions and they choose to represent them, Mr. Jordan was president of NEA for a few years, and he did such a good job, and he went to the school board meetings and he represented his group, and I think that's a good thing.
When my mom started teaching, it was in 1977, 1978 timeframe, and at her school district, it was a very critical time because as a first-year teacher with 3 kids, she qualified for food stamps, and we were on reduced and free lunches. She couldn't even afford the union dues, but the union stepped up in her small school district and said, you know what, be our secretary, we'll cover your union dues, and when we go on strike, you'll be a full union member. So I have no issues with the teachers' unions, never have had an issue with teachers' unions in over those last 40 years that I've known about them. I do believe that the 2 groups here, NEA and MST, I believe they do work together with the school district, and that does need to continue. We need to make sure we are getting representation and working with everybody to make sure that conditions in our schools, how teachers are treated, anything like that is always done above board and in all legalities. And I think it's important because I think as teachers, you know what you need in a classroom. I can't sit here and say 30 years after I graduated from high school what a high school math teacher needs. The high school math teacher is the one that has to tell me what they need so that we can provide it for them. And so having that good working relationship is very key for the future. And I believe the NEA and MSTA in this district are very good organizations and want to be part of the solution.
Like Aaron said, it seems that the SJSD United is working very well. I've not heard any problems about that. I think a board's role, of course, is to establish enough finances for salary. The things that attract new people to any organization is salary and opportunities. Once they get in the organization, then the real work begins. How do you retain them? And retaining people depends on salary, and also it depends on respect, the culture that you're working in, the opportunities you have, the facilities, the working conditions, and the resources made available to you. So there's more than just salary to attract people. And that's things that both the board and the administration have to work on. And that's things that I'm hoping our new superintendent understands, which in discussing it with him, he seems to have a good grasp around what it takes to keep people. So 2 pieces. Number 1, attract good teachers and good staff, and then number 2, how to keep them. 2 different strategies involved.
Hopefully I can remember the question.
So
I think staff and teachers have a right to be represented by whomever they choose. We've got policies that support that. I know that the SJSD United, although a new group, is a fantastic opportunity for all groups, all employee groups to come together, union or not, to have a single voice to the board and the administration. And my first example of seeing that was during the pay date change discussion. I thought it was great that everybody united in discussing what they thought about that, how it impacted their members, and I think as long as everybody cooperates and continues to work together, employees should have the right to choose if they want to just be represented by a small group because they're in a specific area of the school, or if they want to go to a union representation. But the United Group, the new United Group, is a fantastic way to bring everybody together.
Thank you. And we'll start with Mr. Reeder this time. Several of you have mentioned so far about the lack of money that the school district has. Early childhood education has been shown statistically throughout the country to be a great investment in education, but it's a long-term investment, one that costs money, doesn't pay off until later. What's your view on early childhood education? And this speaks to your priorities as a board member. How great a priority would you make that? Mr. Reeder, please.
No, thank you very much. And by the way, when I worked for the district, I belonged to the MSTA and the NEA, by the way. But on that, that's something I've brought up several times in these forums, is that that's absolutely the last thing we should be cutting. It should be something we should be doubling every year, because that's our biggest bang for the buck. It's a proven statistic that if that student's not up to speed by about 3rd grade, we drag them through the system. So it affects all the good students and everything else the way we do. Discipline, blah, 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 blah. We wanted to have the most highly, that should be a goal, that'd be one of my goals, is to make it so that we have the smartest 3rd graders in the state of Missouri. If we have the smartest third graders in the state of Missouri, let's say within 5 years, 6 years. In about 20 years, it's ching-ching for us in this community, because we haven't dragged a whole generation of students through the system to the lack of benefit for the good students, everything else going on right. And how can you blame some of these kids? You know, we have like 600 families that both parents are in jail. How does a kid go to school every day like that? So we can do that by starting 4 years old. That preschool is the best money spent we could ever spend. So where we go,
I believe early education is very important. I actually would like to see it in more of the schools than what we have had the last few years. I think when they originally started, it was in more of the schools. I don't know if it was lack of parents enrolling their students. I don't know if it was just the expense, and I'm talking 20 years ago. But I think it's very important. That's what Mr. Duncan has said many times as far as buildings and stuff. I think we need to look at if we can make cuts there, if we can downsize on the buildings, if we can, I just feel like if we could get in and really look at some of this stuff and see some other cuts that we could make, maybe we could make sure we had early education, because I do believe it's very important.
Again, my mom's certification in teaching was K through 6 with a special ed degree, so she loved her kindergartners. Unfortunately, when I went to kindergarten, what I learned in kindergarten, you don't have to know as a 1-year-old or 2-year-old, it seems like. What I knew, my son knew as a 3 or 4-year-old, so it is very important because of where kids need to be in the learning process. If you attended any of the One Vision Task Force meetings last year when we were discussing the levy, the biggest, most, not necessarily controversial issue, but the most emotional issue was whether or not we could add in any money at all for early childhood. And I know one meeting I think was almost entirely spent of the full 2 hours discussing early childhood. It is that important, it is that needed. You know, if we are able to eliminate a couple buildings, maybe we can turn those into early childhood centers and work to get them staffed, whether it's through the school district, whether it's through, as an example, an organization like St. Paul Lutheran that has a good preschool, maybe they can expand into one of our old schools or something. But there's got to be, it just can't be on the school district because there is a lot of cost involved. So we need to look at the why, the church organizations that do preschool, and see what we can do for our kids, because it is very important and it is very critical to get the kids started now at that age.
I think we all agree with that, and the board had a lot of very hard discussions about what we do with that. Right now, we realize that our current budget, we're about 120 students fewer this next year than we are this year in that program. What we have instructed administration to do, though, is any extra money that we can find in the budget, that's where we want to focus it. One of the good things that's happened is initially we started out with about $100,000 to put modular classrooms at Lindbergh School. And the administration came up with a better idea of doing construction up there, which will come out of an entirely different budget, come out of capital rather than operational budget. So now we have roughly $100,000. We're going to see how we can distribute that and maybe beef up the early childhood program. I can't say anything more about it than anybody else has said here. It's a very, very important program. And the question is, how do we fund it? Too many people, and there are voters out there, too many people out there who are voters say that our schools are K through 12, period, that's it. Don't spend any money anyplace else, don't worry about anything prior to K, and don't worry about anything after 12. We just cannot be in that position if we're going to have the community that we want to have.
This mission of the school district is K through 12. If we don't want this cut in the future, we need to revise our mission to include it so it is not on a chopping block at all. I think this is the biggest opportunity moving forward for us to invest to create an ROI, because as a business owner and as an educator, I've seen firsthand the outcome of not having early childhood education. It is, you know, teachers know firsthand all of the issues that students can bring into classrooms. If we don't get to those kids early on, they're not going to make it very well through the school. I think we have to invest specifically. So you talked about priorities. My priorities: 1, rebuild the trust internally first. 2, get back to early education, and that probably means revising the school board's or the school district's mission to include it as a permanent part of our strategic plan moving forward. That's it.
David?
I pretty much agree with everything that's been said already. One of the things that, one of the most emotionally charged board meetings that I attended was recently when we were talking about pre-K funding. And I think everybody would agree with that. We do need, as we add to our budget, hopefully in the future, in the planning, is that we can provide permanent funding for pre-K. I know the board's main responsibility is K-12, but we need to make it a priority and not just spend the state's money. We need to also invest locally in our pre-K programs, and also be able to provide facilities for them as well, because we keep moving around, or we need extra facilities. The pre-K programs get moved, and so we do need the facilities for it. This also ties to what I was talking about earlier. We need a sound pre-K program because we do have the ever-increasing low-income student population, and this would definitely help with that situation.
Okay, this will be the point where the NEA will never ask me back to moderate. But we've got a short time in this segment, so I'm going to ask that we just go 1 minute on this. How comfortable are you with the percentage of administrators to teachers? Part of what they've said after the last election, we're just too top-heavy at the board, at the administrative offices. What do you feel about that? And we start with Lori on this one.
Good. Good luck, Lori.
Well, actually, I absolutely agree with that. I don't know as much as I should know as far as what all administrative positions are, how many we have. I absolutely, that would be one of the top things that I have on my list that I would want to look at. Also, the pay, also, and I don't know if this is, I feel like we're losing a lot of good teachers to become administrators because the administrative pay is so high, and it's like, I don't know, I just think that kind of needs to stop. We need to retain these good teachers, and we need to pay them more for what they're doing.
I wanted Larry to go first because I think he has all the answers in front of him. I know there is a perception, I think there's a perception probably in most every school district that there's too many administrators for the number of teachers. I know a couple of years ago I did look on the DESI website with information that I had, and we actually have fewer administrators per teacher than the average school district in this state. In fact, I think we needed, based on DESI numbers, we needed to hire 12 more administrators just to equal state average. So it is perception reality, it may be. There may be too many administrators based on the positions that they have, but that through what I want to do with the whole research show and tell is research all those positions, determine what they are and if they're needed, and then go from there. You know, it's just a matter of digging in and finding out what the truth is and then presenting that truth to everybody so everybody knows what's going on.
The number of administrators is directly proportional to the number of schools that you have and the number of teachers that you have. When we reduce schools, like closing 2 schools, we reduce the number of administrators. The things that concerns me about our structure right now, as an example, the director of secondary education has nearly 20 people reporting to them. How can you possibly provide support for 20 people? No organization I know of can provide, one person provides support for 20 people. The director of elementary education has 16 people reporting to them. I don't know if we have too many or they're just in the wrong places, and something that we do need to look at. But to say we have too many, I'm not ready to say that. To say we have enough, I don't know yet. Those are things we have to look into. As far as pay, St. Joe is traditionally known for being a cheap place. We don't want anybody in St. Joe to make more money than I'm making. That's our strategy. Of course, I have never gotten paid what I was worth in any job that I had. But we need to look at the salaries, make sure they are competitive, whether they're teacher salaries, administrator salaries, superintendent salaries, or my salary.
You're free.
I'm free. I'm cheap.
How do you follow that? Is this an opinion question?
Most definitely.
So I've done a significant amount of research on this. If we look at payroll as a whole, the majority is teachers and support staff. So it is a perception issue sometimes. I'm not defending or supporting anything right now. It's just statistics here. Larry's right. If we want fewer administrators, we need fewer buildings. That is a fact. There's some overlap simply because we have multiple buildings to do multiple things. I should talk faster. You know, the superintendent that's coming in, I'm sure, actually I know, part of his onboarding is he's going to review these things. And as a board, we will be there to help, provide input, and this is all part of that gaining trust. We need to work together to make sure that we have appropriate numbers, and then when we do have appropriate numbers, and we're sure of that, turn to the community and say, this is the due diligence we've done, we have the appropriate numbers, and then they come on board with the idea of moving forward onto the next issue. Thank you.
This is a question that has come up to me a number of times when I've talked to members of the public, and I would come back, well, what do you mean by too many administrators? Well, there's just too many. So, and I think the district in the last few months, reducing the budget, has worked diligently to reduce administrative cost. And Larry might correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's $926,000 that they've reduced in administrative costs.
Got 5.
This is by eliminating positions, combining positions. Some of those I have a concern, as does he, because one coordinator is doing the same job that 3 have done in the past. So we'll remain to see if that will work. So I think we're beginning to get everything back in line, and hopefully the public will view the district positively by making these administrative reductions, and it'll be something that the new board will continue to look at.
Yes, thanks. We have too many administrators and they're all overpaid. So we go back to where we have the highest paid teachers in the state, highly motivated teachers, the best ones we can demand the most out of, the person at the point of contact with my 13-year-old granddaughter. When we have that highest paid person in the room, then all of a sudden administrators are a lot less important. So I would also say that you don't come to St. Joe to become an administrator. You come to St. Joe to be a veteran teacher, wherever. So you don't come here to be an administrator. I would say the highest paid person, teacher that administrator supervises, whatever the highest rank a veteran teacher could have, any administrator should be paid more than 10% of that person's salary. I don't want administrators in this town. I've never read any books about some administrator downtown saving the life or changing the life of a child. There's volumes about teachers changing the life, changing the outcome of a community. Administrators, go someplace else if you want your high-paying jobs. We got the highest paid teachers. We hardly need you anyhow.
We'll move on to the next segment. Again, these are questions from the audience. So first of all, Ken, you said you're afraid you might not get asked back.
I didn't say I was afraid.
when you ask a question of are there too many administrators, that's a way to guarantee you're going to get asked back.
I was just, oh yeah.
So my question on, this is a very well-worded question, so I'll just read it directly from this. As a member of the St. Joseph School District Board of Education, what can you or we do to foster a district that attracts and retains and values its teachers as professionals who can grow, earn a reasonable competitive salary, and feel confident in raising their own families here? At present, this is not a district any teacher should intend to retire from because the opportunities offered here are limited beyond the goodwill of a job well done within one's classroom.
How long do I have to think before I answer?
I just said that.
I'm used to being able to think for a while before I answer at my job. Benefit of working at home, no one can see me. I will say just from personal experience at the small school district I grew up in, you know, I knew all the teachers. They were there for many, many years. And how did that work? It was through the respect and trust that you had between not just the board, but the administrators of the school to the teachers. An aggressive pay plan that was put in through the threat of the strike that they had. And the fact that the teachers were valued for the work that they did. Every 3 credits of education that they gained was another step on the pay scale. So it's through, some of it's through pay, but a lot of it's through the respect and getting the teachers then what they need in the classroom to actually do the job. Because if a teacher has what they need, they're getting the respect from the administrators and they're getting appropriately paid, I think they will want to stay and work here for a long term.
I think Aaron pretty well covered it. I mentioned earlier, there are many things that keep a person in their job. It's not, the salary is important, but also the secondary things. The respect they get for the job, the ability to do their job unimpeded by upper management, but also the upper management needs to be there to support them when they have needs that they need. I didn't go to school here. The facilities, the working conditions, the comfort level in their classrooms, being able to have discipline problems handled by people other than themselves, so they don't have to fight with parents or students. So there's a lot of things that go into making the classroom a good place to come to work, a place where you want to be excited to come to work. Salary is important, but all these other things are important also. We could never lose sight of the other things.
So I have a number of good friends that are teachers in the district, and pay is important, it is, but teachers don't leave and staff don't leave because of pay. They leave because of poor pay policies, and they leave because of a lack of support and a lack of resources, a lack of trust. And I don't know that from being told by my friends. I know that because I employ nearly 50 faculty and teachers with a less than 5% turnover. There is a way to handle your most important resources, and that is how we're going to attract and retain. Pay is important, don't get me wrong, but it's like Larry said, it's not the top and #1 thing. We're not losing teachers today because of you know, $5,000 more down the street. The commuting or the moving is not worth it. We're losing teachers because of everything else.
Yes, one of the things that I've been talking about is building trust, of course, within the community, but one of those is within the building itself, or with our employees. I have many colleagues that are still teaching, actively teaching, and the morale is probably about as low right now as I've ever seen in the last 20 years, which is probably much to be expected. I think to regain the reputation that we've had, it's going to take a number of years, several years, for things to calm down, to stabilize, under the direction, hopefully with our new superintendent, that things will change, but it's going to take a while. And as a number of people leave our district, they also carry our story wherever they go, and they go all over the state. So it's been a little bit difficult, but again, I think it will take a long time. When I equated this to a sports scenario one time, is that many of the teachers that we've recruited, especially in secondary, over the last 2 and maybe 3 years, are going to be sent away over the next few weeks because there will be not any positions for them in our secondary schools.
Okay, I forgot the question.
Oh, as a member of the school, as the Board of Education, how do you foster an environment that attracts and retains faculty, teachers?
Okay, well, I still pay is #1 on my list with faculty, teachers and staff, not administrators. But there are a myriad of reasons why people do not leave other than the pay. And I totally agree with that there's been this long-term mentality from downtown that downtown never has your back. And being out there in one of these schools day after day after day, year after year, and when you know they haven't got your back downtown, and it depends on what kid complains or causes a ruckus, who their last name is, how you're going to be disciplined as a teacher. How do I know this? I was the most used substitute in the system for many years. As a male teacher, I would go everywhere. And you got to see the will happen in every single school. And that's actually why they stopped using me, because I was finding out way too much back in the day. So, teacher, highest paid teacher, people waiting in line for their job, we get the best. And my 13-year-old granddaughter at voting gets the best too.
Well, for me, I feel like our teachers need to be to know they're heroes. They need to know that actually they should be top. I believe, actually, in my opinion, teachers should make more than administrators. Administrators are just there to support the teachers. That's what they're there for. I feel like right now, they don't get, you know, I worked 16 years at Central, and one of the biggest things that you heard from the teachers was the lack of support from administration. It wasn't, they didn't complain about the secretaries and the maintenance people and the cafeteria people. It was their lack of support from administration. They need to make more than administration. Administration needs to know that they're just there to support the teachers.
Okay. So this next question is one just because I enjoy watching people squirm. So one of the things on the table was that had been thrown out there is to reduce the number of high schools from 3 to 2, and let's keep it at 60 seconds. Just a quick, your quick take on that fun question.
Here's what I can tell you. If you take the student population of Lafayette and Benton and add those two together, you have 121 fewer students than you have at Central. So Central has 121 more students than Lafayette and Benton added together. If you take the budgets of Lafayette and Benton and add those together, it is $1.8 million more than Central. So what brings the question to my mind is, why are we paying $1.8 million more for those two schools than we would pay if we had those two consolidated? Realistically, I don't see any way other than to build two new schools. Realistically, economically, politically, I'd like to see a new school in the north, a new school in the south. The high school should be the crown jewel of our community. That should be the thing we're most proud of. We'd have to rename them. We've had Larry North and Larry South, whatever you want to name them. But end up with two schools of which we're proud.
Not starting my time yet, Okay, so, it's an emotional thing, going from 3 to 2 or 1. But let's put it in perspective for a second. What's more important to you? Is it school pride or is it security of our campuses? Is it budget or is it school pride? So when you start putting these things into perspective, is it more cost effective? Yes. Do we need to increase the security of our buildings to avoid, potential issues? Yes. So, I'm not a very emotional decision maker. And to me, the opportunity to save money and make our schools more secure, if that action is building new schools, 1 or 2 high schools, or whatever the case may be, that's how I'm going to vote.
This is a very emotional issue, I'm sure. I think when comes the time for the community to weigh in, we may have to lease the arena downtown for everybody to come and speak. But it's something the community needs to think about over the next. This isn't going to happen next month, next year, even probably 3 or 4 years from now. But it's something the community needs to be thinking about and needs to weigh in on. What do we want? What do we want our school district to look like? This is something that the current board or the new board will not be deciding in this next year or so. It's something that needs to be discussed and discussed in great detail. I think there's not a problem with resizing our number of schools, elementary and middle school, but the high school is where the main discussion is going to come from. So something, again, I would urge the community to think about logically, kind of step away from the emotion, because we've got 3 high schools here that the community is very, very proud of.
There's a campaign going on right now in this town, St. Joe, uncommon character, or character uncommon, or whatever it is. I think, in fact, these different areas of town, and that neighborhood, that pride, as you say, is important. I don't believe in this big megalith schools with thousands of people in. I don't even believe with the grade school model of going up to 700 some students. When I take my 5-year-old or 6-year-old to school, I kind of want to know the janitor, the neighbor, and stuff like that. I don't believe in busing them clear across town. That's another thing what went wrong with our early childhood development. They try to bus them all in from over to some new big building they closed several years ago. That should be right there in that local closest school to where that kid's growing up. It's kind of the old one-room schoolhouse mentality. It can easily be done. Bigger's not better. Having these different segments of town add character. And the idea that you're going to do this to save $1.8 million in $140 million budgets. Forget that little savings on your budget. What about what it does to destroy those neighborhoods that you take those schools out of forever?
I believe that whatever we do, it's going to be a ways down the road. I believe the community definitely needs to have input on whatever decision is made. Right now, if you're talking about building 2 brand new schools, you know, maybe they would go along with that and their kids would be at safe, state-of-the-art schools. I mean, the community may be okay with that, but if you're just talking about busing north end students to the south end school and putting them in trailers and that type of stuff, absolutely not. I would never go for something like that.
I'm thinking Aaron North and Duncan South. I actually have thought about this because when we moved here, it was kind of a curious question for us 5 years ago as to why in a town of this size you have 1 really huge school and 2 smaller schools. So as an outsider, to me it makes sense. 2 high schools, same size. Although after living here for 5 years, I do understand that there is a lot of Benton pride. There is a lot of Lafayette pride. So as part of what I have said online and in other forums is, through the whole research show and tell is, you've got to explain the numbers that Larry has said with the savings and stuff. 2 high schools has fewer administrator costs. But if the city is willing to pay the extra to have the 3 high schools, then I think that's what we need to do. Then we need to look at how we handle those schools and the educational programs, because there are programs that are offered at Central that can't be offered at the other schools due to the size. So you need to explain the pros and cons of that. And if the city decides 3, then we go with 3. You don't get to answer again.
Okay, so we have, our time is running out, and we definitely want to make sure to give you guys all a couple minutes here at the end. So you have 2 minutes each to make any clarifying statements about some of the issues we discussed today, or anything else you would like to bring up here. So 2 minutes each. Go ahead, Luke.
Very good. I'll just use my 1 or 2 minutes to tell you a little bit about why I think I should have one of your votes. And I'll try to keep them in short bullet points. Number 1, I have academic and business experience uniquely blended together on how to essentially run an organization that teaches people. That's a difficult type of business to run. There's a lot of logistics and a lot of regulation. Number 2, I've lived in this town and before this in a small town called Stewartsville, just east of here, for nearly all of my life. I think all but 5 or 6 years. Number 3, I'm a passionate community leader. I care very much about the 10, 20, 30-year outlook of what's happening based on the decisions we're making today, which is what motivated me to run. Some of these decisions, and I understand that the board can be in a difficult position, they're going to have some massive impacts if they're left and not corrected, not fixed, not refunded. You know, I'm a decision maker that is based on facts and statistics, but I also understand the importance of morale and those that are carrying your mission forward. You know, I often talk about any successes I've ever had in business are not normally because of me. It's because of the team that we've put together, and you have to have buy-in first and foremost. So with that, I'll pass it on.
one of the main reasons that I had decided to run for the school board was because of my belief that education is the foundation for the future of any community. And that probably sounds like a cliche, but I said a lot of those in the classrooms over the years as time went along. I think I can bring the proper skill set to serve on the school board. One, I have worked in both the public sector and the private sector, almost equally, about 20-some years each one of those. So I do have the business background. And somebody asked me, well, there's so much to do with budgeting and everything. Well, you know, I was a business teacher. I taught marketing and economics in the classroom for over 20 years. I worked in private industry. I am very capable of reading budgets and accounting forms, all those types of things as well. It's also important for me to be a part of. I certainly can't do it alone, and it's going to take a long time, is to rebuild the trust in the community, both within the community itself and internally within the school district as well. One of the closing things that, and I've said this most every time that we've had the forums, is that oftentimes when we have candidates speaking, and not any of us are particularly doing this, but oftentimes campaigns dwell on the negative side of things, the things that aren't going quite right or what we need to fix. And believe me, folks, we have a number of things that still need to be fixed, but we have come a long way. But don't forget that we do have a very, very good school district here. It's a strong school district with extremely good teachers, very good programs. We just need to continue to be able to support them and for us to go forward, because we've kind of taken a backward step here for this next coming school year. We need to be able to go forward again, provide the resources for the teachers, and make everything about the students themselves.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out here on a Saturday. And I'm asking for you sincerely for your vote. I would just be one of 7 votes, but I'm asking for you to give me an opportunity to continue the work we've been on for many, many years about watching the taxpayers' dollars. And then the additional mission now to make our teachers one of the top paid in the state. Some people may recall that last time I ran for school board was in 2010. And I lamented about losing against a very, very famous and popular and important person. And I sure wished I could be him. But you know, as time wore on from 2010, not so much. So I've been in this battle about watching the taxpayers' money being spent properly for the education of our kids. My 2 points. I'm watching out. I'm going to be there for the taxpayers. I'm going to be very approachable. And I can work with anyone. Even you, Larry. I'm there for the teachers. That's my number 2. And what does that equal? We got the taxpayer watched out for. We build their trust. It's all about the money. They don't trust us about the money. They aren't worried about how we're educating our kids because we got good teachers out there, unappreciated and underpaid. In order to move forward, we have to put 3 new voices on. We got to get away from the old regime. We have to put 3 new voices on. We have 6 people here that could do that. You want change? You got to vote for change. You got to vote for change. 9 days from now. And again, I just honestly would ask for your vote. Give me a chance to be on there. And we're at a turning point. A lot of things could happen very positively in the next 3 to 6 years.
The reason I'm up here running is just because I want to help. It's what I do, I guess. I worked for the school district for 23 years. I worked 3 years in the cafeteria, 4 years in personnel as an administrative assistant, 16 years as the bookkeeper at Central High School. Money, budgeting, that is definitely my thing. Right now I'm working at the Teachers Credit Union. I retired a year and a half ago and couldn't take it, so I went back to work part-time. I have 5 grandchildren in this school system, from kindergarten to a senior. My granddaughter that's a senior, she's already been accepted at Northwest. She's going to be a teacher. She wants to be an early education teacher. So it makes a big difference to me what happens now, what happens in the future. I want to do what I can, I'm definitely one to dig in there, do the work that needs to be done. I have been on many city committees, so I'm used to working on boards, and I've been on the ad hoc committee, the Division of Aging. Right now, I'm the secretary for the Fire and Emergency Committee for the City of St. Joe. I've been on the Rewrite the Codes for the city. I have 15 years, I was a PTA mom on the executive board. I am a worker. I will do what I can to help. I definitely want to lift our teachers up. I think besides the students, I mean, students, that's what we're about, is the business of educating students. But after the students, my number one priority is the teachers.
I am the ultimate outsider in this election. I'm not an ex-district employee. I'm not a politician. I'm not a for-hire lobbyist. I'm not in with the leaders of this city. I'm not running a fancy campaign with rallies or fundraisers. All fine things, but none of those are actually needed to actually do the job of a school board member to research and evaluate and make decisions. I'm just a dad. I'm a relative newcomer to this town who wants to put the focus back on the education of every child. My son will actually graduate from Central next year, so I could actually easily say none of the school problems are my problem because it won't matter to me in a year. But that's not who I am. I believe every child deserves a great education like my son has gotten at Central over the last 3 years, and I want to be part of the change to a better future. If elected, the decisions I make will be based solely on the research and facts that move our kids forward with their education. There'll never be a question if I'm doing something for a donor or what a friend wants. I am running solely to try and do what is best for our kids and our teachers. I'm also not afraid to put my thoughts and answers out there to questions being asked. I created my own website with information about me and a Q&A. I'm not afraid to listen and converse about topics. It's what I do daily in my job. I don't believe that I'm always right, and it doesn't have to always be done my way because I may not be right. If presented with information that there's a better way, I'm willing to change my mind and do what is best for our kids, because that ultimately is what we're all here for, is for our kids' education, whether it's our own kids, our neighbors' kids, and the future kids of this town, because education is the backbone of our community.
Well, I agree with everything everybody else said. Very good ideas. As you know, I was appointed to fill a vacancy last April, and I retired from Heartland 13 years ago. But before my retirement in Heartland, two of the things I was involved in was, number one, working on poverty issues within the city. Poverty in St. Joe, as you know, is on the rise. We have to do something to stop that. The other thing I was deeply involved in and led for several years was the strategic planning at Heartland. So I have a really good feel for strategic planning, and I think that goes into what we need to have done right now. Poverty, the only weapon with which to fight poverty is education. We cannot buy our way out of poverty. We cannot legislate our way out of poverty. We can only educate our way out of poverty. And that's the passion that drives me, is how do we address poverty? How do we get a handle on it in St. Joe, and how do we turn it around? So that is the reason that I decided to throw my hat in the ring last April, and that's the reason I'm here today asking for your vote again. Since I'm retired, I don't have to report to anybody other than my wife. She'll tell you that my biggest weakness is that I am right all the time. We can get past that. I do want to go back to one point I made earlier when I mentioned the November election for a levy. The thing that we have to keep in mind is when a levy is passed, the money does not start coming in until January. So if we do not pass a levy in November, that means we're facing at least another $5 to $6 million cut in the 1920 school year budget, because the money will not come in time. So we need to keep that in mind how we ask for money. School year budgets are different than private budgets. And believe me, I'm familiar with big budgets and feel very comfortable with them. Like was mentioned before, there are some really good people up here in front of you. Whichever three you pick, you're going to have three winners out there. So I'd ask for your vote, and then whichever other two you pick, that'll be fine also. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Great questions.
According to the rules of the forum, any candidates that couldn't be here were able to submit a statement. I will read a statement from Seth Wright. Thank you to NEA for hosting this forum and giving the voters of St. Joseph an opportunity to make an informed decision about the Board of Education election. Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend due to a family commitment. My daughter has a dance competition in Kansas City this weekend, and the schedule of her competing will prevent me from attending. I apologize for not being able to attend as educators, but as educators and parents know, you will understand that the importance of spending time with your family. Thank you for your passion for public education in the St. Joseph School District, and if elected, I look forward to working with you to move our school district forward in a positive direction. Again, thank you to all who came this afternoon. Thank you to our candidates. And Eric, take us home.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give our candidates one round of applause. I guess I'll take it since I was given it. I also would like us to give our moderators a wonderful round of applause. Thank you very much. In our closing here, which is very brief, because I know we've been here a while, before I start this, I will say that if our candidates would like to stay behind for the remainder of the time that we have allotted for today, we have put on our schedule time for people to meet and greet and speak with them if they are available to stay. So just keep that in mind, and if those people stay around, then you are welcome to speak with them. So in our closing, I would like to thank all of our candidates today for coming out and answering some of these tough questions. The future of our district is going to reside on a new board, and it's going to have 3 of you. The 3 of you that make it to the new board, I do hope that you take this responsibility seriously and that you take it with humility. We need a new direction. Thank you once again for participating in today's forum. And to the audience out here today, I also want to thank you. As I mentioned before, you are the ones with the voice. You have the power to elect the board members who you believe will make the best difference for all of our staff, our students, and our community. Please exercise your right to vote on April 3rd. And I didn't mention this earlier, but because I forgot. But my name is Eric Simmons, and I currently serve as the president of the St. Joseph NEA, so if I'm not just some random guy up here talking to you. But anyway, thank you once again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.